Hi, I'm Tracy Johnson, proud member of Bethel Metropolitan Baptist Church, and today I'm asking you to join me as we examine the impact of the Reconstruction era in Florida. We will consider four aspects to include the emancipation of slaves, schooling, voting, and political representation, with the goal to begin and continue the new narrative, conversations of change. So join me and let's talk. Reconstruction may be the most misunderstood eras of American history. Versions of this era, like the early motion picture Birth of a Nation and the novel Gone with the Wind, which was made into one of the best-loved American movies of all time, popularized a view of the Old South as a genteel society of gallant aristocrats, a lost world shattered by Northern violence. These myths, of course, ignore the injustices of slavery, the eras rampant with racism, and the shocking violence of that time. They also miss the significance of the era's advances in civil rights and justice, and most importantly, the intellect and the resilience of the newly freed slaves. Before we even get to the Reconstruction era in Florida, and before the Civil War, you must take a trip. A mind trip, that is. A boat ride. Imagine, if you will, the horror and pain of millions of human beings stolen from their homeland, packed into overcrowded ships only built to hold 200 people, but you're one of 1,000, frightened, crying, man, woman, and child. Each of you forced into a space no bigger than a gym locker, with little food, little water, no lights, no windows, no toilets. Oh, and you're chained to each other. Of the nearly 3.9 million enslaved African Americans emancipated at the end of the Civil War, following nearly 200 years of slavery, nearly 60,000 slaves were in Florida alone. On May 20th, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was officially read for the first time in Florida by U.S. Army officers. The reading occurred from the steps of the Knott House in Tallahassee, not too far from the state capitol. The official proclamation was read by General Edward M. McCook, just over a week after he arrived in Tallahassee and accepted the surrender of Florida's Confederate troops on May 10th. The announcement from the front porch of the Knott House effectively ended slavery in Florida. On that day, the first freed men, women, and children celebrated with a family reunion-type picnic at Bull's Pond, now known as Lake Ella in Tallahassee. This is why many Floridians celebrate May 20th as the state's Emancipation Day. June 19th, called Juneteenth, is often celebrated elsewhere. This later date commemorates a similar reading of the Emancipation Proclamation on June 19, 1865 in Texas. By early 1865, many slaves were eagerly awaiting a particular sound of freedom, the sound of the big guns. That'll be the Yankees, they were told, signaling their freedom. Blockading vessels blasted tributes, signaling the war's end, with barrages of cannon fire, and the state's occupied towns rocked with the same kind of celebration. At Jacksonville, 250 rounds heralded the end of the not-so-Civil War. From the towns and coastal areas, the reverberations passed into the interior of the state. When the slaves heard the big guns, the general sentiment was them Yankees. Margaret Nickerson, a slave on the Carr plantation in Leon County, reported that at the sound of the guns, runaways came running out of the woods. When the big gun flashed, those runaway slaves come out the woods from all directions. But it wasn't until General Edward McCook accepted surrender at the state capitol, took down the Confederate flag, ran the Union flag up the flagpole, and then stood on the porch of the Knott's house a few blocks from the Capitol and read the Emancipation Proclamation in a loud, clear voice that the former slaves cheered and shouted so loud it really did reverberate throughout the state. Black people had already gotten word that there was going to be some mighty big things going on in Tallahassee that day, so they made preparations to gather together to celebrate. They put on their best clothes and gathered at parks, ponds, and public places wherever they could. There were parades, speeches, and barbecues, and plenty of drinks. It would be another 143 years before African Americans would celebrate this spontaneously, this extensively, and this united as one. And that is the election of Barack Obama as the first African American president of the United States of America. So what does it mean to be free? What can free people do that free people cannot? What does freedom look like in your life? And what gets in the way of your freedom?
Hello, I am Sherian Thurman Reeves, a very proud member of this historic Bethel Metropolitan Baptist Church. And I'm here with
Mary Drayton, and I also am a member of Bethel Metropolitan Baptist Church.
Now, Drayton, we're talking about the newly freed slaves, the ones when they were freed with the Emancipation Proclamation, and they faced a big problem. For 250 years, they had been enslaved. Now they're free. What are they going to do with that freedom? What does free mean to them, or what does free mean to me? Or you?
Well, free for me means being able to do what I want to do whenever I want to do it. But now, that hasn't always been the case with me. I grew up in rural Alabama, and freedom came at a very high price. I can recall during the summer months when school was out, it really wasn't out because we had to work in the white men's fields, in the cotton fields, in the corn patches, in the bean fields. So, yes, freedom came at a great, great price because we were free, but not free.
I understand because I grew up here in Florida under much of the same conditions that you grew up. And as I've gotten older and thought about it, freedom is more than doing just what I want. Freedom for me, or being free, is the ability to make my own choices. I make the choices, right or wrong. I have the right to make whatever choices I want to make, and then I follow through on if I make the wrong choice, I have to be accountable for it.
Right.
But it is choice because God Himself gave us choice when He created us. And so nobody can take that choice away from me. I have the right. It is the rest of you all to help me make the right choice. But even so, Joss Stone had a song a few years ago called I Have the Right to Be Wrong. I really do. I have the right. I have the right to make a choice. God Himself gave it to me.
Well, God gave those slaves the right to make choices, but the white man wouldn't let us make those choices.
Right.
They wanted to make, they didn't want to make, they made those choices for us.
Yes.
And if we didn't abide by the choices that they made for us, many of us didn't live to see another day.
That is so true. That's because when they had the chance to be free in 1865, their first choice toward freedom was autonomy. They wanted the right to make the choice because choices had been taken from them. They wanted that right. They wanted two things: autonomy and land, the right to make their own decisions. Many of the slave narratives, many of the correspondence from that time, all of them had the same want: autonomy.
Autonomy.
Because 250 years of not being able to have anything to say, not even your own name, had taken its toll. We wanted choice. I make my own decisions.
But there's a price that we pay for making some of the choices that we made.
Right. We persevered. It was not an easy thing,
No, it
but we stood up for it. We are human. Nobody has the right to have any full sole sovereign over us. We are people. God made us that way.
Though there were no schools for them to attend, the newly freed slaves walked into freedom extremely eager to learn. It was a sight to behold. Men, women, children holding books like badges of honor. Now they can do it in the broad daylight, or even have them openly lie around their homes. Education symbolized freedom. Education meant dignity. And most importantly, it meant no returning to bondage. One of the most important areas of development in Florida at this time was education. Jonathan Clarkson Gibbs, Florida's only black cabinet member during Reconstruction, was appointed Secretary of State in 1868. That year, he was one of 18 African Americans elected to the State Constitutional Convention. He was appointed as Florida's Secretary of State from 1868 to 1872. Gibbs also served as a Tallahassee City Councilman. In 1873, Governor Hart appointed Gibbs Superintendent of Public Instruction. At that time, more than 1/3 of the state's 200,000 people could not read or write. Many of those illiterate people were freed men and women who had worked on plantations. They wanted a chance to learn, to read and write, but hadn't had a chance to do so. Gibbs made the school system better, adopted standard textbooks, and established many schools. Within a year, he had done so well in encouraging African Americans to attend school that almost 1/3 of the students were African American. Gibbs knew that his efforts angered many whites, and therefore he was careful about his own safety. He lived in a beautiful home in Tallahassee, but chose to sleep in the attic of the home rather than a bedroom. He told his brother he did this because he was afraid of the Ku Klux Klan. He kept weapons near his bed in order to protect himself in case the Klan attacked him at night. Gibbs worked hard to help African Americans receive an education in Florida. Gibbs High School in St. Petersburg, Florida, is named after him. In Florida, the only established college during Reconstruction was Edward Waters College in Jacksonville. It was founded in 1866 by members of the African Methodist Episcopal Church as a school to educate free men and their children. It was the first institution of higher education and the first historically black college in the state of Florida. Believing with every ounce of their being that education was worth the cost, Florida free men and women, along with freed men and women all across the country, endured the war declared on them by white protesters who did not believe that they deserved the chance to learn. School buildings, churches, homes, anywhere blacks were gathered to learn, these buildings were ransacked or burned to the ground. But our people persevered. What obstacles do you think Black schools face that other schools may not? What policies can we implement on a local, state, national level that would help Black schools tackle some of these obstacles? What are historically Black colleges and universities able to provide for students of color that other institutions may be unwilling or unable to offer? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of attending a historically Black college or university? Is it fair to criticize underperforming Black schools for their shortcomings? Why or why not? And what are some ways you can help mentor and guide the next generation in their quest for education?
My name is Gina Denar. I attend Gibbs High School and I'm in the 9th grade.
My name is Janaya Denar. I attend Gibbs High School and I'm in the 10th grade.
My name is Mikkel Perry. I am in 5th grade and I am 10 years old.
My name is Keith Perry. I'm 11 years old and I'm in the 6th grade.
Right now, when we usually go outside and play, the water pipe busted, so water turns off sometimes, it turns back on. The lights flicker and stuff, and we're basically going through a malfunction in the school systems right now.
Well, for one, HBCUs provide an experience that is nearly impossible to find anywhere else. At HBCUs, you get to have a learning experience and a campus experience for African Americans, an amazing campus experience for African Americans. At HBCUs, you build a bond that can't be replicated from a regular university.
You should treat people the way you want to be treated and the way you can help us for our shortcomings, as in you can donate school supplies and other things to help us with our school.
I feel that when it comes to this generation and the next generation really needs programs that are led by the youth of this generation to show them that they can be leaders in their education. It's necessary that these youth of the next generation have that safe space to come and tell us about their educational lives and their personal lives, because we can relate. We've gone through some things that they may go through, and there may be things that they go through that we haven't gone through, but they have a family that they can come and talk to.
The Confederate loss of the war ushered in the Reconstruction period when Blacks and whites struggled with the economic and social turmoil that accompanied the end of slavery. Ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution was vitally important in giving Blacks the legal foundation to develop their values and institutions in America. While the former enslaved Blacks considered the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment to the Constitution freed them, white supremacists refused to accept their former slaves' liberty. Section 1 of the 13th Amendment states that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, shall exist within the United States. In effect, this served as a new type of enslavement. The white supremacist interpretation of the amendment allowed them to justify the imprisonment of Blacks, then used prison labor to work the plantations throughout the South. Although Blacks were freed from slavery, they still were not considered Americans. The 13th Amendment outlawed enslavement, but it did not grant citizenship. The newly freed slaves were as much oppressed by whites as they had been during enslavement. As Blacks sought to live free as much as they could within the law, whites sought to exercise complete authority over Blacks through intimidation and acts of violence, including destroying property and committing murder. The 14th Amendment was in part about the public debt and the denial of white Confederates to make a claim against the government for any losses and damages incurred during the Civil War. However, the first sentence of the 14th Amendment made all the difference to the freed black men and women. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. From this point forward, the formerly enslaved African could be called African American, people of African origin who hold American nationality. The second part of the amendment allowed states to deny African Americans the right to vote. This was almost akin to receiving an empty gift basket. A campaign was soon launched to secure the right to vote for African American men. Women, white nor black, could vote at this time. Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth spoke on behalf of women having the right to vote as well. The right to vote was granted to African American men with the ratification of the 15th Amendment on February 3, 1870. This contested amendment passed because of the African Americans in Congress. It wasn't long after its passage that African Americans discovered that forces that had enslaved them were still intent on sabotaging their new right to vote. It took many years of resistance through petitions, marches, and legislation before Southern whites slowed down their quest to keep African Americans from fully participating in the American dream. And it's not over just yet. What factors do you think dissuade black people from going to the polls? And what resources do you think are needed to overcome those factors? What effect has social media had on political engagement and voting in the black community? What issues are more politically motivating for younger black voters in your community? And what about older black voters? Which issues are motivating regardless of generation? Which politicians of color today seem the most engaged with the issues that matter to you, your friends, and family? What do these political leaders need to help them combat any oppression from empowered white supremacists that come their way?
I'm Marvin York, Deacon Chairman here at Bethel Metropolitan.
I'm Reuben Mays, Deacon, President of the West Coast Baptist Association Layman's, and Vice President of the Florida General Baptist Auxiliary Layman's.
Things that are dissuading the black vote are things like what happened at the polls this year, where you had the poll watchers that were intimidating, where you had people carrying guns outside of polls. It reminded us back that, we thought the clock turned backwards, for that type of intimidation to be there and for it to be starting at the top of the cabinet, the president actually inciting those type of things. So that, again, we should not be afraid. Our vote does count, as Deacon Mays says. And to prove that, when we took Georgia as a state, the black folk went out and campaigned, talked door to door, took people to the poll. The mail-in vote did count. The other party was trying to keep us from being counted. So what mattered? Every vote counted.
Even our fellow brothers who have been convicted of felons, they have the right to vote. Our Lord and Savior, who He forgives us. We must forgive our felons, the guys who made a mistake in life, or the women who made mistakes in life, and give them the right to vote. We have over 1 million people of color that are not voting today. It's time for them to start voting.
And we know for a fact that African American males are targeted. African Americans are targeted. So when they have come and done their time, and they are no longer a convicted felon because they are free, to reinstate their right to vote is an issue that we need to make sure we carry on. We help educate and move them to the rightful place they need to be, is to be able to vote in this magnificent country that we live in.
The issue about our one vote do not count. It's evidenced by President Obama election, President Biden election, that our one vote does count. It is a way that we conquer and divide by telling black people these things. It is very important that we get correct information about our politicians, that correct information about our politicians, so on social media, we're going to believe that mess that is going on. We need to do a better job in helping people who are not versed at these kind of things. And so what I suggest is that maybe we can get groups of people like fraternities, sororities, the church, to inform our people about who's running and what's the issues of running. So that is I think that's very important.
Now, the question about how young people are affected and how they're affected in using social media. Social media is at their fingertips, and this is how they communicate. This is how the college kids and the younger generations communicate. And when they start talking to one another, that moves like it's instant. It's not yesterday, it's not a week from now. It starts to move, and it can make a movement move, and if things have been done with these young people in this age to rally them in colleges, across campuses, across different Greeks, and when they unite, they get things done. And that's what we need to continue to remember. When we actually come together as a people and are motivated to make something happen, we can get it done. We are unstoppable.
And it's important, again, that we take advice as far as who is running in the election, what they stand for, and who knows better than the educators, fellow politicians who are members of great organizations, such as Alpha Phi Alpha, AKAs, Omega Psi Phi, Deltas, don't leave them out. But they are we should be able to lead our people to whom we should listen to on mass media. And we have all the resources. So let's take advantage of the resource that we have and help each other.
And at this time with social injustice, right now America is watching. People are sick and tired of just going along and not saying nothing and speaking up. HBCUs, I've heard in several conversations with several different companies. Now let's reach out to HBCUs and look for the talent. Let's have career fairs for the HBCUs to come through. So right now, I say it is the time for us to make sure that when we hear that kind of rhetoric, we make sure that our people are paying attention, because it's time to make a change.
During the Reconstruction era, 2 African Americans served in the United States Senate. Both were from Mississippi, Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce. 23 African Americans served in the House of Representatives. Josiah Walls was the representative from Florida. He was born in Virginia in 1842. In 1863, he became a member of an African American troop and fought for the Union side. After fighting in several battles and being promoted to sergeant, he was sent to Jacksonville as an artillery instructor. When the war ended, he settled near Alachua and became a school teacher, among various other jobs. As more and more African American men registered to vote in Florida, they realized they needed someone to speak for them. They found their spokesperson in Walls, and in 1867 sent him to Tallahassee as a delegate to the state Republican convention. The following year, he was elected to the State House of Representatives. In 1869, he was elected to the state Senate. The following summer, he was nominated to run for United States Congressman. He won the election and went to Washington. Walls was reelected in 1872 and again in 1874, before finally being defeated in 1876. In 1873, Walls bought a newspaper in Gainesville and called it The New Era. That paper was the first Florida newspaper owned by an African American. For several years, he was Florida's only congressman in the House of Representatives in Washington. He would be the last African American representing Florida until the 1992 election that sent Corinne Brown, Alcee Hastings, and Carrie Meek to represent the state in Washington. Josiah Walls is buried in Tallahassee. With so many factions with diverse interests, do you think it's possible to establish a collective agenda for Black America? And if so, how should we try? What issues facing Black America is most pressing in our current moment? Is it police brutality, education, employment, voting rights, or another?
Good afternoon, and welcome to our panel on a discussion of representation, political representation, as it relates to the Reconstruction period. My name is Malcolm Flakes. This is my lovely wife, Gloria, and we just want to chat a little while about the representation and politics during the Reconstruction period. The first thing that comes to mind really is well, the collective agenda. Do we have an agenda at a national level that kind of represents the feeling of Black families today? And one of the things that came to my mind was the importance of having something like a Freedmen Bureau that was important during the Reconstruction period, that actually was a group that had the teeth to enact and ensure that states' constitutions were rewritten to support education and voting and other activities during that period. When we look forward even into today, there's several problems that result from not having that kind of representation. Things like education itself, things like police brutality. What are your thoughts about those kind of issues today?
Those issues to me stem from one thing, and that one thing is racism. Racism has reared its ugly head again, and I say again because we are never far away from it. It's just what they used to say, hidden racism, because the economy itself is based on hidden racism. And I was just looking and telling you before about this couple that had to take all of their pictures down because she is Black and he's white, and they wanted to get an appraisal of their home. But the appraisal came in so low. So once they removed all of the pictures that showed the family as a mixed family and just had the husband home, the appraisal went up. And that was not the only case. There was another case where a young lady had to get her friend, a white friend, to come in and be the homeowner. And that appraisal went up by over $400,000. Now, what is that other than racism, you know? So everything, education, police brutality, economic development, all of that comes from the race issue.
Yeah, what if we had something like a racism bureau, like we had in years past with the Freedmen Bureau, to actually ensure that policies that tend to lend toward, you know, just outright racism toward a group of people, that you had a group that would actually have teeth in order to hold someone accountable for that. As
long as they were workable.
Another area that would be a discussion topic is activists. Some of our elderly activists were very engaged, not only from the Reconstruction period, where we had 40% representation in some areas, that's down to potentially almost zero now, but what can our younger groups of activists learn from older activists?
I think the younger group really needs to learn how to lead, because at that point they have been put into a leadership role and they need to learn how to handle their crowd. As we saw in the murder of George Floyd, the crowds grew and grew every day, and they were out there constantly every day. And they had to learn leadership. They know the issues, and they can cite the issue, but they just need to learn how to move the crowd and how to have patience and teach that to the crowd that's behind them.
Yeah, you mentioned a key term there, the key person's name, and that would be George Floyd. And one of the things that would be an interesting question is, well, now that we have this Black Lives Matter moving, how does that affect us today? I mean, does it appear to have affected you personally, and how do you feel about the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, the movement has struck me as a chord because, as you know, we have two boys, and you do worry about them being out in the street, being targeted as a Black male, and showing what happened to Mr. Floyd has heightened the perception that many of us have about police brutality. We've always known that it's been real, but others now see it. And just to have this young man calling for his mother at that particular moment really showed, and he really realized that he was not going to be here long. And that's hard for people to actually see. And that really touched the heartstring of a lot of Americans.
That's true. And it would be interesting to get some information on, does everyone see that event with the police and with Floyd the same way? An example would be, Weekly Challenger actually published something 2 weeks ago of public lynchings. And hopefully we can get this on camera eventually. But the thing that I want you to notice, not the people that are being lynched, it's the people watching the lynching. They actually see it as entertainment. I mean, they're dressed up. They think it may be a sporting event. And the one thing that comes to my mind is, would there be a Black Lives Matter movement if Floyd's murder were not shown on national TV? Thank you.
Thank you.
With keep